Welcome everybody to the Wheels Museum on this snowy day. I'm just sitting here thinking about what it would have been like 100 years ago when these properties were really active. To try to get a horse and buggy here, to try to get an early car here. Think of driving on a train or later in an airplane on a day like this. But here we are at the Wheels Museum in 2024 and happy to be here with you. We have a special guest today, Dr. Tom Simms, who's a board member of the Wheels Museum. He's the head of our volunteers. He's an expert on history, and he's a great friend, and so very, very happy to have him talk about the early history and his interest with us today. Dr. Simms?
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank
and
you
I
very
do
much.
like talking about history.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, you were talking about the snow here and the what it must have been like to come into work, and we knew that when at the turn of the century, some workers came on horseback and on buggies. And we have a short history, Leba has captured it from interviewing people. A gentleman who worked as a machinist for 40 years, but he started as a teenager entrepreneur, and he set up a business where he would take care of horses. For the horse that you rode in or your buggy, and for 25 cents a week, he would take care of them, feed them, and water them. And that gives you kind of an idea of the work ethic and the spirit around here, people working so hard to make the rail yard work and eventually develop Albuquerque.
Would you like to tell us some of your favorite stories about people who did work here? I know you enjoy kind of reliving the lives of the men who did build our city and also making exhibits for Wheels Museum to exemplify and honor them.
Yeah, one of the things we're doing, we have a lot of projects going on at the Wheels Museum to enhance the exhibits and to upgrade the exhibits. We're very informal. A lot of the exhibits are handmade by volunteers, but we're upgrading them. And we're getting some help from the Rotary Club of Albuquerque to get upgraded display cases. And what we're going to concentrate on is exhibits that bring to life the workers that were here. A lot of the history of Albuquerque is actually about important people. The mayors and the people who came through here and the governors and the politicians and all that. But what actually built Albuquerque were blue-collar workers. They were blue-collar workers who their stories are not told very well, but they were the ones that were the engine to build Albuquerque. And we have our historical exhibits, hopefully bring them to life. I already talked to you about the one worker who started out taking care of horses. I have a couple favorite stories. One is the story of Frank Archibald family. The Frank Archibald family, we have pictures back there, and they brought in pictures and documents of what it was like for him to work. Some of his awards he got, his retirement, and just that Archibald family and what happened to them and how he built a family that could have security and the family could grow. We know that through the history, those blue-collar workers gradually, through a lot of work on their own, with working with the unions, with working with jobs that were available, they eventually were able to have money that could feed their family, clothe their family, and they actually had a little bit of extra money to do extra things, and a lot of them put it into the education of their children. A lot of them put it into starting businesses or buying real estate. We know of one family, a gentleman, he and his father, it was two generations, the Gutierrez family, that worked here in the rail yard. And the younger man went away for World War II, fought for World War II, came back, had a GI Bill, and that Gutierrez family eventually grew to have 5 dentists in the city of Albuquerque. So the rail yard workers, or blue-collar workers, could move, educate their kids, and so on. We have a story about a gentleman who started as a machinist. When you got a job as a machinist, you were an apprentice. And the first thing they taught you was mechanical drawing, because you had to draw pieces, parts that needed to be repaired or built. And that work had to be extremely precise, as you can imagine. And we have a set of calipers, which are measures. If you don't know what a caliper is, that measures how you measure the size of things. We have that caliper, and we have a quote from that gentleman who talked about the precision that they had to work with. And that's such an educational tool that the people of Albuquerque and our children need to know. Our children who use computers and computer-aided drafting to see that people could make very precise things with hand tools. And that's what they did. We have a story, a favorite one of mine that's kind of a mystery to me, of Henry Takahashi. Henry Takahashi was a Japanese American who worked here in the rail yard at a time when Japanese and Asians were not very welcome around the country. And there were work laws in some states against Asians. But Henry Takahashi, we have a quote from him about how he fit in and was accepted as a member of the team and a member of the family. That's important for us and our children to understand that things like that could happen even back. And Leba has gotten oral histories from people like Mr. Takahashi, who talked about how accepted he was. And those are important stories for our community to know about and our children to learn about, how at a time when a Japanese American could be accepted here, and what happened here in this rail yard where that could happen. People came from 27 foreign countries to work here, and they, by all accounts, they blended in very well. There was discrimination in hiring and in promotions, but the actual people worked very well. Another favorite story of mine, and we have a picture back there of John Tischhauser. There's a picture of John waving from his locomotive. He was an engineer, locomotive engineer in the rail yard, and he did that by day. By night and weekends, he was a concert violinist for the Albuquerque Civic Symphony. We just received a story about Elmer Bass, who was a young man who wanted to be a teacher, needed some money to make that happen, so he went to the Santa Fe Railroad and got a job in the Berlin rail yard. Mr. Bass eventually became a very prominent educator in Albuquerque. He was a principal of Albuquerque high schools. These stories are extremely important. Leba has one about a gentleman that she talked to who used to move railroad ties. Why don't you tell them that story?
There was a family that lived across the street from the rail yards here, and they had 19 children. So I'll tell you right now, if anybody calls me who has 19 children in their family, I'll give you a present. You'll need one. The father moved railroad ties here for 9 years. A railroad tie weighs about 200 pounds, and the family told us he moved them by hand according to the instructions that they would give him every day. And to move the railroad ties, he was paid a lot of money. He was paid 1 penny a tie. So he made 90 cents a day to support 19 children and a wife. And that's the kind of hard labor. When an apprentice started, it made from 7 to 13 cents an hour. Sometimes I teach classes of young people and I ask them, well, how much do you think they made in those days per hour? And kids will raise their hand, oh, $2 an hour? They have no concept of how little the people were paid. But that's how they started.
One of the stories that needs to be told, that's not told very much, is the relationship between the Santa Fe Railroad and the Laguna Pueblo. When the Santa Fe Railroad laid tracks in 1880, they wanted to lay tracks through the Laguna Pueblo. If you've traveled on I-40, it's on your way to Grants, and you can see the railroad tracks there. The Laguna elders stopped the railroad and said, you're not coming through here unless we talk. And the Santa Fe Railroad made an agreement. It was a handshake agreement with Laguna Pueblo. And it was called the Water the Flowers Agreement. And we don't know a lot about it other than the Santa Fe Railroad agreed to hire any Laguna Pueblo member who wanted a job. That meant laying tracks, working in this rail yard, doing various things all through western New Mexico and Arizona. In return, the Santa Fe was allowed to put tracks down and have water rights for their locomotives. The important thing about that agreement is it was made for 75 years and it was held as an agreement. We know in some of our shameful history how many agreements were broken with Native Americans. And that's an important thing for people to look at and try to understand. Something went right there. The agreement was held. Laguna Pueblo members worked for the Santa Fe all along the tracks and in the rail yards here and so on. An important piece that happened during World War II, the Santa Fe Railroad was shipping oil out of California, out of the Richmond oil refinery, and there weren't enough workers to move the oil, and that oil was very important for the World War II effort, as you can imagine. They asked Laguna to help, and Laguna Pueblo members actually formed a small satellite village in Richmond, California, to keep the oil moving. And actually families moved out there, and the railroad built them small housing out of boxcars. And they lined the boxcars, they put in plumbing. But the Laguna stepped up and responded to the agreement, the Water the Flowers agreement. There was respect and reciprocity in that agreement. It's an unusual thing in our history, and it happened here in New Mexico. Our children and all of us need to understand and try to figure out, how did that agreement, when so many agreements were broken, how did that agreement stay in effect? So that's the history we're trying to bring forward and have here to save in the Wheels Museum, so that people and our children can learn and try to understand the good and the bad that happened. The final one I'll talk about is World War II. In Europe, the Allies bombed the railroads, didn't they, in the war effort. And the German Nazi railroads were destroyed by bombers. When the Allies landed in Normandy, they needed supplies as they moved into Germany, through France and into Germany. And to do that, they needed to rebuild the railroads. There was an army battalion made up completely of Santa Fe railroad workers. And their job was to rebuild those railroads. They went over to Europe and they did that. And some of them were killed. Those people, the rail yard workers who stepped up, need to be remembered. We need to understand how they did it. So that's my view of what we're doing here at Wheels, is holding on to that history, having a place where everyone, including our children, can learn and have this educational piece that in many ways we can be proud of.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to point out that Dr. Simms is working on a book, and I'm trying to help with that. We're trying to produce a book of about 20 to 30 short stories. So if you're interested in writing a short story about what you see at Wheels Museum or some of our history, we'd love to talk to you about that. And it comes to mind because of what you just said about the idea of Water the Flowers. I think that would be a wonderful title for that book. So if you want to come into Wheels and see what we're doing, or you have a story to tell us, or you like to write, please let us know. We're working on this book, which we hope to publish to talk about the history that Tom has so beautifully discussed today. And if you'd like to call us at 505-243-6269. We're located at 1100 South 2nd on the south end of the Albuquerque Rail Yards, which is a 27-acre property. We do a lot of educational programs in here and serious things, but we have something very fun coming up. On the 2nd of March, we are going to have a headphone dance party. So the people come in and put on headphones, and there's no sound, but people are allowed to dance in the museum, and it's a lot of fun to do that, and you get to see all the exhibits at the same time and be with friends. On the 9th of March, and that's going to be from 12 to 2 on the 2nd of March. On the 9th of March, we're having a very interesting event from 10 to 12, which is called Hobby Day. And we're going to teach people of all ages how to make model railroads and other kinds of models, build building. So if you're interested in that, please give us a call, 243-6269. We'll book a space for you there. We are always looking to do interesting events. We have something very, very special coming up. Sure, we have Ronn Perea on April 13th. He's going to give a serious talk about the Bataan Death March, and we're looking for anyone who has any connection to that very sad time in history to let us know. We'd like to honor those people. We'd like to have them in our audience. And Ronn has given many presentations here about history. He's written several books, and he's a wonderful, wonderful speaker. So that's a very important event that we're having on April 13th at 11 o'clock. So we hope you'll come. We also do a lot of private parties, birthday parties and events. So if you're interested in doing something here with your family, we've done weddings. Sad to say, we've done funerals in here, a lot of birthday parties. Just call us and let us know. Tom, it's so wonderful to have you here, always. And thank you for doing this special podcast today and always helping us. And he waits on all the customers. He runs all the volunteer programs. He does the books. He does everything we do. He does the newsletter. Couldn't do it without you, that's for sure. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to
Oh,
work here
so
in
thrilled.
my retirement.
So
It's a
thrilled that
wonderful
we're
place.
working on this together and
Yeah.
helping others.